In today's Black Clover video, we talk about the next qliphoth Devil Baal, and why he might be the one who created Asta's demon swords, the Blacksmith Devil. This could then lead to Asta getting a new sword very soon, the Demon Reinforcement Sword. Also, only a small percentage of the people who watch our videos are actually subscribed, so if you end up liking this video, consider subscribing. Please enjoy this video, let's go! Before we talk about the Blacksmith Devil Baal, Asta's new sword, and why Baal might be the one who created Asta's demon swords, instead of the dwarves, who are actually famous for creating such magical swords, and so on. We first need to lay the groundwork for this video very quickly so that we are all on the same page. This is very important and of course interesting. So when we talk about the next qliphoth Devil in Black Clover, it's not always so easy to just say it's the next qliphoth Devil from demonology. That's because there's a little bit of a problem in Black Clover because of Megicula, who is an original devil from Black Clover, but was introduced as one of the qliphoth devils and therefore must have replaced a real qliphoth devil from demonology. So this leads to one of the following possibilities. Either Megicula changed her name for some reason and she's indeed one of the real qliphoth devils from demonology, or she replaced the devil for some reason. If she replaced the devil, then this will have a very good reason, which will then be an important part of the Black Clover plot, especially the backstory of the devils. Either because she replaced the devil that died in the past, then most likely in the first qliphoth war, or it will have something to do with Julius Novachrono and the Time Devil. But that's a whole other topic. If you want us to explain it in more detail, make sure to leave a like. It will show us your interest in this topic. Let's say 4,000 likes will show us that you really want us to do a separate video on this topic in great detail. Anyway, so now that we are all on the same page, the next devil can either be Megicula, or another original devil, or the next qliphoth devil from demonology, Baal, or any other version of his name. This devil is also the main subject of this video, the Blacksmith Devil. The reason why I personally don't think it will be any other devil than Baal is simply because of the great opportunity this one devil will open for Black Clover, especially for Asta. And here's why. Baal is the lord of the first blacksmith. He's the blacksmith among all the devils, and thus a manufacturer of weapons, especially sharp weapons such as swords. And so he has very powerful weapons himself, which he uses in battle. It is important to distinguish here between real swords and magic spells. We have seen a lot of swords from characters who don't normally use swords, like Yuno's Spirit of Zephyr, Xenon's sword, Noel's sword, and now even William's sword, which he gave to Yami. The difference is that all these swords are spells and not literally physically forged, so they are not the result of a blacksmith and therefore cannot be used by Asta, for example to store the sword in his grimoire. But Baal in demonology uses real swords, and that is what opens up so many possibilities. Apart from the dwarves, he is literally the best sword maker in the world, literally the master of the very first blacksmith. He's the master of all weapons. You see where I'm going with this? So if someone like Baal is actually going to have a sword, then we can assume that it's not just going to be a normal sword, but more on the level of Asta's demon weapons. So equipped by special abilities, which would make Baal the only character apart from Asta and Licht who uses similar swords as the demon swords. If Asta ever awakens the true abilities of his swords, as was indicated when he saw Licht use the true ability of the demon swords, and Asta then said that he too will learn to use the true ability, it will probably be against Baal. Maybe Baal will even teach Asta how to use the true ability of the swords, due to typical arrogance of the devils. And of course because he may not want such legendary swords to be wasted without Asta using the true potential. After all, Baal is supposed to be a blacksmith, someone who loves swords. And not just any blacksmith, the best. Perhaps Baal even recognizes Asta's swords because of the first qliphoth war. If we assume that the swords were created by dwarves, as we originally thought, created specifically for the first qliphoth war. And this is where the main part of this theory begins. If Baal really is such a legendary blacksmith, then his sword will be no ordinary sword, as mentioned before, that's for sure. And that's probably why we all have the same idea in mind. If Baal's sword is not a spell, but physically forged, then his sword will not disappear in case of his death. And if it is a physical sword like all the other swords Asta uses, then Asta would get the best reward for defeating the first blacksmith in history, a new demon sword. This raises the question of whether Baal could be the one who created the demon swords. Of course, we will not ignore the possibility that the dwarves might be the ones who created Asta's swords, and thus will give him the final sword. But we have found a second very likely possibility where Asta's swords could come from originally. So the next qliphoth Devil Baal could have been the one who created Asta's swords, and therefore could also have the next sword for Asta's demon sword collection, so that the other 3 swords actually belong to Baal. Maybe even tries to get the swords back from Asta. Definitely an intriguing idea. But when you first think about it, the names of Asta's swords somehow seem to contradict this idea, especially Demon Slayer and Demon Destroyer sword, as it was made for slaying and destroying demons. But maybe we misunderstand the meaning of the names. I mean, if you think of Demon Water Magic and Demon Light Magic, the word demon only symbolizes the connection to the underworld, and not that this water and light is specifically effective against demons. So that would mean that Asta's swords were not made to slay or destroy demons, but simply because these are actually swords from the underworld, just like Demon Water Magic and Demon Light Magic. Otherwise, the Demon Dweller sword would make no sense, since no demon dwells in Asta's Demon Dweller sword, but rather that the sword is able to absorb the magic of others, and because it is demonic, it is called a Demon Dweller sword. This, of course, as mentioned, opens up a whole new possibility as to who created Asta's swords and where they originally came from, which could then be due to the first qliphoth war, when Baal was sent back to the underworld but his 3 demon swords remained in the human world, and were then picked up by someone who then passed the swords down from generation to generation, not necessarily within a family, but simply among sword users. For example, masters and students, or just generally gifted people, or just people who took over the sword after the death of the previous owner, like Asta did, who just found the swords, or got them more or less by coincidence. So considering what I just explained, the swords could really have been created by Baal, the best blacksmith in the world. The following part will be very interesting and important, but before my partner continues with this Black Clover video, please take a moment to leave a like. With your support, we can continue the Black Clover content on this channel. Thank you.
Before we talk about the possible abilities of the sword that Baal could use, let's talk very briefly about his design. We know that the Dramlet in particular is designed very much like in demonology, with the peacock wings that he can most likely open like a peacock. We can't ignore this possibility that Baal might also have some aspects from demonology. However, Baal is really ugly in demonology and does not match Black Clover's style at all. But it is important to keep in mind that the demonological attributes would most likely only refer to certain aspects of a devil in Black Clover, such as the wings, horns, and maybe even the tail, but not the physical characteristics in general. So, Baal is often described as a combination of a human, cat, and a toad. This generally doesn't seem to fit Black Clover. And if that wasn't enough of a crazy combination, he also has a set of spider legs. The only idea we have on how Tabata could adapt this design to Black Clover's style is if he gives him wings that resemble those of spider legs. With such wings combined with the general idea that Baal is a blacksmith with swords, we can naturally assume that instead of a weapon, he would use his wings to fight, as if they were swords. But of course, that would make the great possibility of Asta fighting a real swordsman impossible, which would simply be a waste of potential. So speaking of Baal's sword, what exactly could this sword's ability be? We can try to understand the possible abilities by examining Baal's attributes in demonology and assuming that these abilities could be the ones he uses with his demon sword. But if Baal's sword is really like Asta's swords, then Baal would have to have a general magic ability that has nothing to do with his sword. Like anti-magic has nothing to do with Asta's swords, but he can use his swords with anti-magic. Baal has the attribute of lightning and is often associated with a storm. He can hurl thunder and lightning and send heavy rain. He is also able to make himself invisible, and that is literally all that is known about the Devil Baal and his abilities. Combined with the description that Baal is a blacksmith and the most famous weapon user among all devils, levels, one might assume that he has a weapon with which he can use all these abilities. But these mentioned abilities just don't fit into the skill theme of Asta's swords, especially if we consider the theory that Baal was actually the one who created Asta's demon sword, as my partner has already explained. So if this is the case, instead of thinking about what abilities his sword might have, we need to think about what abilities Asta's swords already have. And then if we compare them, we might be able to find an ability that fits into the set of Asta's demon swords. With this concept, the abilities of Baal that we just described would then not be associated with his sword, but with his own magic ability. For example, if he has the magic ability to make himself invisible, as described in demonology, then while that's a very useful ability, it would be of no use in combat if you have no way to do good damage. And considering that Baal has such a rather useless magic support ability, but is still a qliphoth devil, he must somehow be able to do a lot of damage, which would then only be possible with a magic weapon like a very powerful demon sword, which would amplify his physical power and maybe even his magic abilities. This would then be a reinforcement demon sword. If we now compare the ability to reinforce both physical and magical power with the abilities that Asta's 3 demon swords already have, then perhaps we can find a common scheme into which such an ability would fit, which in turn would be an indication that Baal might indeed possibly be the creator of Asta's demon swords. Let's start with the Demon Slayer sword. The basic idea of this sword is that it can cut magic with its edges and reflect them with its flat side. Also, it can use the owner's magic to condense it from the edges of the blade into a larger blade, increasing the width and the length of the sword. So in general, this sword is mainly suitable for close combat and attack, that is for physical combat. The next one is the Demon Dweller sword. This sword is able to absorb magic, either its own or any other magic, even anti-magic, and then it can release this absorbed magic with flying slashes and with properties similar to the magical attributes it absorbed. So the basic idea of this sword is that it can use to control magic. The third sword is the Demon Destroyer sword. This sword absorbs and removes the effects of spells by removing the relationship between cause and effect. Since the ability affects casualty, it not only neutralizes the magic but also its effects. Thus, it is used to neutralize all kinds of magic effects. We don't have to consider Asta's new katana, since it's just a normal sword with no special ability, and Asta simply made it his own, thanks to the anti-magic and the sword magic Grimoire's ability to save other swords. So let's look at Asta's current abilities with the 3 original demon swords. We have one sword for attack and defense, and one sword for magic control, and one sword for cancelling magic effects. We can see that Tabata didn't just pick random abilities, but tried to cover all possible aspects of magic combat. So what else could Yuki Tabata come up with that would fit into the skill scheme for Asta's possible new weapon that he might receive from Baal? The only possibility we can think of would be a magic sword that would enhance Asta's physical and magical abilities, allowing Asta and Libe to perform much more powerful, fast movements, and most importantly, more powerful anti-magic that they would not be able to use without such a sword. For example, for an anti-magic zone. This kind of sword would definitely fit into the previous scheme of Asta's demon sword abilities: defense and attack, magic control and magic neutralization, and the only thing missing is the improvement of movement and strength, both physical and magical. These are the only things we see are still missing to complete the perfect ability scheme for Asta. So, a demon reinforcement sword. And if you remember what we said about Baal, which is that a devil who relies on physical swords might not have the best magical abilities for combat, such as invisibility magic, which is one of Baal's attributes in demonology. So he would need a weapon to boost his physical abilities, and that's exactly the ability Asta is still lacking to complete a perfect set of skills for any possible combat situation. It's just a perfect fit. What possible abilities do you think Asta's new future weapon could have? Let us know in the comments below and tell us what you think about this theory. Do you think that the dwarves created Asta's swords, or was it Baal, the very first blacksmith? And will Asta's next sword be a sword forged by dwarves, or will he defeat Baal and therefore take Baal's swords as a reward? We will read all the comments below. So that's it already, folks. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, don't forget to smash the like button, and if you're new to our channel, make sure you subscribe with the notification bell turned on. See you guys in the next video. Yummy out!